It's about 5:30 now, no problem.
5:30. We have about. So we should wait for 5 minutes, maybe 5:35.
Yes, yes, not an issue. No problem. The full form of Sitara again is Center for Technology.
Alternatives for rural areas.
Technology alternatives for rural areas. Okay, lovely.
So we run a master's program, what Sudha was saying, what's called Masters in Technology and Development. We have on an average 30 students every year. And
nice.
Interesting background of students, a lot of them largely from the technical background, but diverse disciplines. At least a few every year who have finished their engineering, gone out and done some work, and then come into the program here. And then we have a PhD cohort of about, I think at the moment, maybe about 35 students in Sitara that look at various issues at the technology development, bottom of the pyramid, rural areas kind of intersection. Some of the work is actually technology development. Some of it is policy related, some of it is, so it's quite interdisciplinary and it's quite challenging for all of us, faculty and the students, both masters and the PhD students.
Very nice.
It's a very small center. We are a total faculty of 12, including 2 adjunct faculty. And maybe not the smallest, but one of the smaller academic centers in IIT Bombay.
Oh, okay. Nice. Very nice.
We have a mix today, I think, both of first year students, second year students, and of PhD students.
Okay. So we have about, I can see from the participant list that we have about 32 other than Sudha, you and I, right? And
the coordinator is Abhino, is that DPC Sitara host. He and Sudha are the TAs for this session.
Okay. So just give me a heads up whenever you want me to begin, and I'm happy to get started.
Yes.
And since we have a minute or two, I'm sure, Pankaj, this is just to, may I just begin with an introduction while we are waiting for a few more to join us?
We just wait so that everybody can hear you.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking I'll talk a little bit about myself and my background.
I'd like to hear that, but we just wait a minute or two so that everybody has a chance to.
No problem at all. Lovely. And perhaps if people have questions, they can post it on chat subsequent to the I may not be able to see it during the presentation, but I'm very happy to go through them after the presentation is done.
And either Sudha or Abhino will also do the moderation.
Lovely. Okay.
So they'll pick the questions and they'll put them to you, or they'll get the individuals to ask. So that should work quite all right. They've been doing it quite well.
Perfectly. Fabulous.
Sudha?
Yes, sir.
It's 5:35. Maybe we can start, na?
Yes, sir. We have around 40 participants, sir. So I think we should start.
So I'll very briefly introduce, and then Sudha, you'd also like to say something, and then maybe we can ask Gopa also to introduce himself.
Yes, I'll read out the bio, and then maybe Gopa sir can add to it.
Yeah, that'll be nice. So good afternoon, everybody. And I don't know if any of okay. I was just wondering if Professor Shah has joined. I don't see him there. Whether we could have, but anyway, I will.
I just have joined.
You're here. Okay. So Gopa, this is Professor Shah, one of our senior most faculty, and he's also the coordinator for the seminar series. Of course, he does a lot of other very interesting things as well.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon to you. Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
start.
Lovely to meet you.
Yeah.
So just a quick good afternoon to everybody and welcome to this Sitara seminar. And I'll just start and leave by saying that I'm very glad to have Gopakumar Menon, who's been a very dear friend for a very long time and has been doing some very interesting things for many, many years now. And you must have seen his bio note that was circulated. And I think the topic that he's going to speak to us about is something that is something we know about intuitively, but we don't tend to look at it as carefully as we should. So it's really exciting to have him, Gopa, for agreeing to speak to us. And I will now hand it over to Sudha and Abhinav for the formal invite and introduction. And then we can also begin with the request, Gopa, that you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Right.
You also do the presentation that you will do. And
Excellent.
thank you again for agreeing to speak to us.
Yep.
Sudha, all yours.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I would like to give a brief bio about Gopa, sir. He completed his PGDM from IM 1989 to 1991 with an abiding interest in development, economics, and sustainable agriculture. Worked as an investment professional in 2 venture funds over an 11-year period, and since 2002 have facilitated leadership development programs. He has been the part of the advisory team at Craftisan, a social enterprise, and have consulted with small and medium firms and social enterprises in areas as diverse as footwear, technology, and chocolate. Founded River Otter Conservancy for the conservation of otters and their habitat. On behalf of Sitara, I welcome you, sir. And
Thank you.
we may begin the session, sir.
Thank you so much, Sudha. And, I don't really have anything more to add, except that, as you probably just heard from Sudha, I like doing different things. I'm a hobby economist. Development economics has been a passion for a long time. And exploring different models of microeconomics has been something I've been deeply interested in, particularly with a sort of bent towards agriculture and rural development. So Sitara actually comes beautifully into the limelight as far as I'm concerned. Now, this presentation is about 2 classes or 2 kinds of businesses that I've had the privilege of observing over many years. And if you folks have questions, keep them posted and so on and so forth. And I'm sure the team will sort of bring up the questions at the appropriate point, and I would look forward to addressing them. So roughly about half an hour to 35 minutes is the duration of the overall presentation, right? So over the years, when I've done work on otters along rivers, one of the things that I've often observed, and this, before I get into that, so this is about tiny entrepreneurs who do stuff that you pass by when you're driving on a highway, when you're walking around in the city, you probably see them doing what they are doing, but you don't really observe, if you see what I mean. It's just something that gets embedded in your subconscious, perhaps. So while doing work on otters, often we go along rivers in South India, Karnataka in particular. And this that you see here is a common sight, right? And for years, even 20 years ago, I've seen this happen in villages in Kerala, for example, and I come from the rice bowl of Kerala, which is Palakkad. And it's always intrigued me, particularly because I just love to watch ducks waddling around in these paddy fields. So it was more as, from a very common citizen perspective. But some years ago, about 4 years ago, I actually stopped by one day when I was passing by the beautiful temple town of Somnathpur, and just outside Somnathpura, which is near Mysore, I saw this cluster of ducks in this wet paddy. This is part of what is called the transhumance economy. The transhumance is essentially when livestock keeps shifting around, or when people move with livestock to different regions, right? So I parked the car, and along with my colleague, we walked across into the field and interviewed 2 wonderful people who told me about this economy, MURALI and his assistant Satyan. And MURALI is actually, because he's been with ducks all his life, he's actually called Tarav Murli. Tarav in Malayalam means ducks. And he comes from the border of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And what's actually happened, what happened then was a conversation which went on for about an hour when I really understood about how this economy works. Right. What we actually see here is about 1,000 ducks. And what you actually would notice is these ducks will all move in one direction, pecking away, turn around, and then move in exactly the opposite direction. It's beautiful and joyous to watch. It happens at many part times of the year for approximately 8 to 9 months in a year. And there are about 3 months when it doesn't happen, 2 or 3 months when it doesn't happen. And how does this economy really function? So if you really look at it, what is the function? So yes, I must start by telling you, if you see that little box that I've added down there, this is a time when possibly in about a month and a half from now, when the land has been prepared and puddled, which means it's been plowed with water, ready for the rice harvest. So ducks are generally seen around rice, around paddies. India is, of course, a significant amount of our agriculture centers around paddy, and therefore the duck economy, the transhumance duck economy, is central to the paddy economy in some parts of South India, couple of parts of Eastern India, but it's not all over the country. Right? Do keep that in mind. Let's move on, right? And this is, let me tell you what I really mean by the title over there. I will explain that in a bit to all of you. How does this economy work? If you examine, or based on my conversation with Murali, what I recognized was the first thing that farmers really want is for ducks to help them prior to the cultivation. Now, traditionally, ducks were localized. There were people who had them around their villages, and as the economy grew, as transportation became easier, the transhumance economy came into being, where ducks were moved across regions, across as far now as about 600 to 800 kilometers one way, which is why I call it a gaggle to Goa. In case you're wondering what the word gaggle is, it's actually a word used for a collection of geese. And you have ducks that go from Andhra all the way to Goa for the paddy and then return. Right? They cover, because they do this into multiple locations, they would cover about 3,000 kilometers a year. Right? What do they do? In summer, they typically take the ducks, people who herd these ducks, the transhumance herders, so to speak, would take these ducks to areas around adjoining perennial rivers, the larger rivers in the subcontinent. And then these lands adjoining the rivers would be irrigated, and then the ducks would actually move up and down these lands belonging to a particular farmer. It may be 2 hectares, 3 hectares, whatever is the land size. When they are in this land, what do they actually do? Here's the value they give to the farmer. First of all, they pick weeds and pests, right? And that's just a little dig to Monsanto, by the way. So what ducks tend to do is they tend to find juicy, fresh grasses, which could be pests to rice, and pick them up, and juicy, weeds and to rice, as well as pests, particularly caterpillars and stem borers. These also happen to be the favorite food for ducks when they are in the paddies. They enrich the field with droppings, right? And you may not have thought that they actually reduce percolation losses. So those of you who are familiar with the way paddies work, one of the risks in paddies is you have significant water percolation losses because of rat holes and crab holes, which also incidentally result in a number of snake holes, but that's an aside. What ducks tend to do is, as they sort of move around, as they waddle around, and with their webbed feet, they tend to cover up these holes, and therefore the percolation losses come down. This is something that Tarav Murali told me, and subsequently I verified by reading up online as well. So that was very interesting. I never really knew about it, right? He has 1,000 ducks, but here's the fascinating part. his family, which has got heaps of people, I mean, he probably has over about 100 relatives, all engaged in this business, have about 120,000 ducks. That's 120,000 ducks, right? That's a large number for one extended family, right? And if they were to take a family photograph, the ducks would have to be kept out, as you can imagine, right? So the little bit in between, about 2,000 tax-free, I'm going to come to in a minute. So at this point, we're just talking about what's in it for the farmer. Let's talk about what's in it. Oh, before we go to that, let's look at this. This is just a little clipping I took, or a screenshot that I took from the website called the News Minute, which talks about ducks actually being laborers in the Kerala paddy fields after the harvest as well. So they are there before the harvest, which is at the time of before the sowing, just after the transplantation, and subsequent to the harvest. These are sort of the three large phases when ducks virtually invade the paddy fields. But what's in it for Murali other than listening to 1,000 quacks? Right? The first, as you can imagine from the photograph down there, is eggs. And that's where we come to 2,000, the number 2,000. So he has about, in the 1,000 ducks that he has, there is approximately, the number of ducks are about 900. The males, which are called drakes, are about 100. So there's a ratio of roughly about 10:1 approximately, right? And he and I were joking that at least there is one species in which we have kept the number of males down and done the world a service, right? And if you really look at it, we get about 400 eggs a day is what he gets. The rates vary between 3 to around 8 rupees. So I've taken an average of about 5, and he gets that for around 9 months of the year. And that comes to about 2,000 rupees a working day, which is pretty much every day out of those 9 months that he is active in the field. What you must also find interesting is that this kind of both the egg production and duck activity tend to peak just at the onset of the monsoon, or in South India, in interior South India, the monsoon really hits in July, not really in June. So it's the pre-monsoon period and the initial monsoon period. Those are the peak months for duck activity and for eggs. And a duck group is also called a flock or a brace or a raft or a gaggle, any of them. So this was an education for me, and hopefully it is for you as well. And it has an annual economic output of about 4 lakhs of rupees. Just one human being, Tarav Murali and his assistant Satyan, they rake in around 4 lakhs of rupees in a year. This does not include the sort of terminal value, which is a financial term for when you finally sell the duck after 2.5 years, and it actually sadly ends up on the dinner table of somebody. But if you keep that aside, the output of the eggs alone is about 4 lakh rupees, the economic output. And what fascinated me subsequently was that I thought all of this was profit. But that's not true. There are lots of expenses. He has to pay Satyan for one, Murali that is, has to pay his assistant. And then there are significant transportation charges because these are transported in trucks. Sometimes he has to pay the farmer a small amount, right? And there are other associated costs as well. Not necessarily veterinary costs, because these ducks they came down from sort of wild strains, so they are fairly resistant to most diseases actually, though there are risks. And we will talk about that a little further. So the profit margins can be low, right? And so it is not a great occupation in case any of you are considering this after your master's, right? It's not a great option. I must tell you that right away. But if we move on, the other fascinating part, in addition to the profit margin that struck me, was as an extended family, just this one family was probably contributing an economic output of 100 times this, right? Because the family has about 120,000 ducks and he has about 1,000. So it's over 100 times this. So it's about 4 crores or above. And if you were to scale this to the level of probably the 4 southern states which actually have communities that practice this, which is Karnataka, Andhra, Telangana, and Tamil Nadu. Kerala doesn't have a resident population of duck herders, but they do move in and come out, right? If you consider these 4 states and look at these populations, we probably are talking about a few thousand people. And then are we talking about an economic output over 100 crores of something that you and I just don't even pay attention to? The government has never even looked at. And my estimate would be upwards of 400 crores to 500 crores per year, particularly if you considered Eastern India as well, right? That's a pretty significant economic output, and it contributes to the employment of probably multiples of 10,000s, probably 20 or 25,000 people across this country. And it involves families as well. It's not just men folk. There are a significant amount of women folk who are involved at various stages of this whole business, right? And it's very fascinating to keep that. That's the size of the transhumance duck economy. I'm going to take just 2-3 minutes before I wrap up, and I really hope you're finding it interesting as we go along. This is a photograph from Thrissur, by the way, and you can see the multi-stories in the background, and there's a very famous wetland near Thrissur, which is pretty much in the center of Kerala, and these ducks are from that wetland. And if you look at the last 100 years, if you look at development, particularly in the last 20-25 years, as we've seen it, what has actually evolved for this economy? The first thing clearly is, from a neighborhood operation, it has become a trans-state operation or a transhumance operation. Secondly, the market rules. Earlier, eggs were stored locally, right? So yes, so this is just a note to any capitalists in the audience, right? So today it's very much a market-driven economy. Eggs move from various parts to various other parts. Kerala is a big market. Andhra is a very big market as well. Odisha and West Bengal are significant markets. So eggs tend to move significantly. Duck eggs, I'm referring to. We all know that poultry, that is Gallus gallus, that species, of course, is all over the country, but we are talking primarily of ducks, right? The mobile phone has brought about a tremendous revolution in the way these guys do business. So before they actually transport ducks, they go across, they fix up with a potential farmer with whom the ducks would, in whose land the ducks would stay. So they do a recce. When do we come in? They fix up their transport. And once they reach, Satyan and Tarav Murli actually have to communicate and keep in touch with their family. Though these are 2 men whom I met, I've often met communities or families who are with ducks. So the entire family, it could be husband, wife, children, it could be 2 families working together, maybe brothers and their families coming together. So it is very much a sort of peripatetic occupation, but it can be lonely, and therefore it is important to keep in touch with the family. And the mobile phone has been very important for them. Right? Yeah, they're not on Instagram yet. So just in case you want to know. And microfinance has played a very important role, primarily to get them started, especially when they have a problem. What do I mean by a problem? Sometimes there could be a disease, there could be a drought, they could very quickly lose birds in the flock, right? And lose large numbers, they could get into debt. And microfinance came in as an option. And in some places, the rural cooperative banks offering loans at fairly low rates of interest. When I say low rates of interest, I mean sub 20%. That's why I said fairly low rates of interest, because otherwise this can be a very debilitating rate of interest in other situations. So microfinance has played a role here. And the other, obviously, the other sort of revolution has been in transports and roads. Now, why is it a revolution? Because transporting ducks is not easy. They need access to water. They need to move quickly. You can't take days to take them through. So good roads and good transport facilities have actually aided in the transhumance operation, right? So why support this? Why should you or I or the government or anybody support this kind of activity? I was fascinated to read about the connection between ducks and reduced methane emissions. I never knew about this. I read about this a little while ago on Monga Bay. And it said primarily that because of the soil aeration that happens, the dissolved oxygen results in aerobic decomposition of the soil, of nutrients in the soil, as opposed to anaerobic decomposition, which means less methane release. So emissions actually come down as a result of ducks waddling around in paddies which have been recently plowed and puddled. The second, very clearly, which all of you know from the numbers I've just shared with you, is employment. The third, again, is the terrific role they play in ecology. I mean, just think about it, right? It is probably the finest form of ecological agriculture that we can think about. In fact, in parts of the Northeast and going all the way to South Asia, there is a rich, vibrant tradition, which is rice paddies, fish, and ducks. And if you wish to Google later, you can actually find out so much about this sort of agriculture, practiced by most famously the Mishmi community and many other communities in Arunachal, in the north parts of the Northeast, in going down to Vietnam, Cambodia, and so on, traditionally. So this is a very nice way of a very, very sort of evolved form of organic agriculture. In addition to all this, obviously we need eggs as well, right? And yeah, I got carried away. No, it's not electricity, sorry. But if you look at the first four, clearly this is a great, important role that, that ducks actually have to play in the economy. You can ignore that bit on electricity. So if we move on, would you or would I like to be Tarab Murli? Would it be something that we really want to do? It's a tough life. It's a brutal life, actually. And what I would like to suggest also is that, the risks in this are very significant because you could lose your flock. And when you lose your flock, it can be debilitating. There are incidents where the entire flock of 5,000 birds have got either they've perished because of disease, or in one case, because they went in, had a drink of water, and later the duck herder found that it was a saltwater bath and all the ducks died within the next 24 hours, right? These families move, they're migratory, and as a consequence, there could be risks to the women and children as well. It is a tough life because the photograph, this is from AP, as you can see, it is a very harsh, this photo was taken in February and the sun was most harsh at that time. And I just couldn't imagine living in the conditions under temporary shelters that these folks had, right? And it can be lonely, like we discussed. Education for the kids is a real issue. There's no government support of any sort, which is, I would imagine, a kind of tragedy. And of course, if it's any one of you, there's no video gaming as well, right? So there we are. In a nutshell, that's the economy. I've had about 20 minutes to discuss that, and I hope you've found that interesting, right? If there are any questions on this, I would love for you to actually post them. And then this was my first economy that I wanted to talk to you about, the transhumance duck economy. And let's move from livestock and look at a very different kind of economy. All of you have probably looked at a well like this at some point in your lives and looked at it with a certain degree of longing. If you are a swimmer, you would love to jump in. If you aren't, you would just love to hang around there, right? Making wells in India, traditionally creating wells was an art, right? And it's an art that today is dying out, and we know the reasons for that. We know it's because the water tables are falling and bore wells and everything else. I'm not going to go into that, but I'm going to talk to you about a fascinating community in my city. I live in Bangalore, and this community lives in Bangalore, right? But before we come to the community, let's look at the issue that Bangalore has, right? We are on a ridge. We have two river basins, as you can read by the side there, and a very, very small percentage of our rainfall actually reaches our aquifers. But if we were to increase the recharge to 50%, we would get close to 1,400 million liters a day. Why is that number important? Because that's the amount of water we draw from the Kaveri every day. And we draw that across 100 kilometers. It's horrendously wasteful because the numbers are varying, but anywhere between 23% to 35%, depending on whom you would want to believe, is the wastage of the water in transportation. 23 to 35% of that 1400 million liters is actually wasted in the 100-kilometer transportation for that water, right? So is there an option? Zen Rain Man is probably the Instagram name as well, but he's a good friend of mine. His name is S. Vishwanath, and he's done a fantastic job along with his team in an organization called Biome to motivate people in the city, and that's the demand side of it, to motivate them to create wells for consumption in their homes and for recharge on one hand, and to motivate the community of traditional well diggers who were there in the city, but it was an occupation that was dying and dying rapidly, right? So just give me a minute. I'll put on the light behind just to ensure that. Here we are. So look at the screen in front of you. These are barefoot hydrogeologists. This is a community of people we call the MANNU VADDARS, right? There are about 750 families who are engaged. There are more of them, more of MANNU VADDARS in the city, but they are involved in different occupations and so on. But 750 families that are involved in this occupation, which is digging recharge wells and wells, right? And what they actually do, they do both of these, right? And how do they do this? So I'm just taking an example of a community called Rainbow Drive, where the water is marshaled towards pipes, and then they go into these little pits, and the finished product sort of looks like this, right? And Rainbow Drive is a fantastic success story because pretty much they are in an area which is completely water deficient, and yet the few borewells that they have, because they have been recharged, are able to supply the residents with water pretty much round the year, right? So if you look at the reason for that, it's because Bangalore is really very well endowed with rain. We get a fantastic amount of rain. We get 3.5 million liters per acre, right? But like you saw 2 slides ago, most of it doesn't go into recharge. And if we were to create recharge, we could control the issue of flooding, which I know is a big issue for Mumbai as well, and for many cities. And for Bangalore 3-4 years ago, it became a serious issue in some of the low-lying areas in the city, right? In addition to that, of course, we get water security. So it's sort of win-win for everybody, right? And Biome, which is this organization with a wonderful team, and Vishy is part of that team, they set themselves a goal of 1 million recharge wells in the city. And their objective was, if each well, which is about 3 feet in dia and roughly about 20 feet deep, was constructed, if we did 1 million of them in our parks, in the large organizations which have factories in our sort of industrial areas, in homes, in residential neighborhoods, which are like gated communities, imagine the scope for harvesting, because each well can hold about 4,000 liters of water, right? Yes, it's pretty cool down there, isn't it? And this is the community that's actually doing the work. And a little more about the community, right? This was a dying occupation. They were moving away, particularly because of, they were getting occupations which are again transient, such as the laying of fiber and cables by the telecom companies and so on. They were moving into that sort of digging, right? Biome and a couple of other organizations have got them back to something that is very much part of their tradition. But here's the interesting part. Their children don't necessarily want to go into this. And part of it is because they don't see it as an occupation with a great deal of dignity or government support. They are getting educated, and with the process of education, they are looking at other occupations, which seems to be the case in so many other occupations in this country, just as much as it is with ducks as well, right? The duck economy is also a transient one. So we don't know if the MANNU VADDARS will actually survive this occupation, say 25, 30, or whether the occupation will survive along with them 25, 30 years from today. Today, the average incomes are about roughly in this range, but we have some entrepreneurs who are earning much more, right? And among this community. So there are entrepreneurs who could be earning between 50,000 to a lakh. And when I call them entrepreneurs, I mean, these are people who go with crews of their community, with a crew of 8 or 10 people, and say, we will do it for you as a turnkey project, right? Overall, just this with the 750 families provides occupation, employment to about roughly 2,000 people, and the livelihood impact is about 3 times that or more, right? And what will happen, let's say, if biome succeeds? Once the million wells are dug, there is a need to actually clean up and desilt about 10% every year, including ones that, for example, I have a well in my home, which I use fairly regularly. I use it for the garden, I use it at home and so on, but I need to get it cleaned and desilted every year. And these guys come to my aid for that, right? If you look at the economic impact to date, which has already happened, by the way, they have already done 100,000 recharge wells. So this is not something that is a pipe dream. It's flourishing at the moment. Each one costing the end consumer about 30 to 40,000. We're talking about 300 crores of livelihood impact, of economic impact, right? Completely below the radar, right? That's phenomenal. And if you were to multiply this 10 times to look at what we can see for the next few years if biome succeeds, we're talking about a 3,000 crore economic impact, right? And so far, they've probably desilted about 10,000 wells in the last few years, the last 4 or 5 years. And that's another 25, 30 crores of impact. So that's phenomenal in terms of impact, right? Well, yeah, that's one of them, Rockstar Ramesh, yes. And he's happened to be a good friend of mine as well. So I took a photograph of his, right? So this has become in some ways viral, right? The wheel and axle plant of the Indian Railways has done a terrific job. And they were earlier getting 2 lakh to 3 lakh liters for their cooling processes. Now they get it completely from their recharge wells. They looking at what they were doing, the Border Security Force, which is not very far away from the wheel and axle plant. They have a large establishment. They contacted them and said, can we do something? So it sort of, in some way, became a very vibrant movement. And that's where the numbers started churning in a very positive direction. So there's a lot of positive news here and traction. And the good thing about Bangalore generally in these things is people are aware, people read, people move, they're willing to spend to see that impact, right? And among the bureaucracy, we've had some very aware people in Lal Bagh and Cubbon Park, which are the two lovely parks in the middle of Bangalore. We've had a number of these recharge wells constructed, which have had a tremendous impact on the groundwater table. Right? And my final slide before I close is, will this move to rural India at some point? Will farmers who today do not understand that they are on the cusp of well, I'm talking of my area, right? Most farmers in our neck of the woods in my area do not understand that they are on the cusp of a water crisis. Will they adopt this? Will the government help them dig recharge wells and open wells? If that happens, and if there is a way we can move towards giving these guys a long-term sense of dignity and ownership, it might not be a transient occupation anymore. So as I close this talk, I'm going to just take 1 more minute and summarize these 2 occupations. The things that join them together, the digging of wells and recharge wells on one hand, and the transhumance duck economy on the other, the things that join them are the fact that the government doesn't even recognize these occupations, and yet they are vibrant occupations creating a fantastic economic and livelihood impact, right? They are under the radar or below the radar. They impact livelihoods and the environment in fabulous ways. We need to give them the respect and dignity that they deserve, because the multiplier effects of their continuing doing what they are doing could be immense. On that note, I'm going to close the talk. Of course, I'm very happy to answer questions, and I hope you found it interesting and useful. And should you wish, I'm happy to share this presentation for whatever it is worth. Thank you so much, right? And very open to questions, right?
Thank you so much, sir, for an interesting session.
Right.
We have one question in the chat box, sir. Water security is a common concern. Why are we focusing on linking the well digging process to a particular community? Can it be improved in such a way that people from all the communities join?
Yes, I can see that, and it's from Kritika. Please don't get the impression that we were focusing or we were linking this process only to this community. That was not at all my objective. I took this community into focus because they are traditional well diggers, and I was looking only at Bangalore city, and the fact that this community they've lived in Bangalore city for at least, well, Bangalore as we know it, for at least 100 years, right? So it was very much an example of one community in one city. There are a number of other communities who are engaged in well digging, to the best of my knowledge, in different parts of India. And we need to recognize all of them, every single one of them. So to that extent, if there are people from other communities who want to enter this either as an occupation or because of the fact that there is a livelihood or environmental impact, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Yes.
Jayant?
So my question is this, that in cities, especially if I talk about Bangalore, the water aquifers are going very low, right? So in that situation, like digging a well will make sense, because I think they will not able to extract water from that. So will that be a feasible thing to do? And as you said that you also have a well in your house, in your garden, so that
Yes.
you have got it built, or it was like previously there, like for quite a few, for some time?
I didn't understand your first question. I'll answer both. I didn't understand your first though.
Okay, sir, let me repeat. I'm just saying that there is a water levels are going down in the city, so the idea of building a well will make sense, because they will not able to, even if they dug a well, they will not able to extract water, because they have to dig a few 100 meters to get water. That is the
Okay.
idea.
No. Okay. So Jayant, well, the answer is yes and no. Um, Here's the thing: an open well is the shallow aquifer. The bore well is the deep aquifer. The Bangalore has a fabulous shallow aquifer. In fact, if I tell you, you'd be really surprised. I live in a part of Bangalore called Domlur, and water here is available at about 12 to 13 feet for most parts of the year. Right now, because we have entered summer, it's gone down a little bit. It's probably at about 20 feet, but otherwise it's about 12 to 13 feet. This is the shallow aquifer, right? Um, your question is actually about the deep aquifer, the borewell economy, which is driven by rigs and everything else. That is in deep crisis at the moment, and that's going deeper and deeper, 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet, and there's no water. But in many parts of Bangalore, water is available through when you dig between 10 to 25 feet, right? It's not a problem. Indranagar, Koramangala, I'm just taking off some areas, right? Parts of Jayanagar, Domlur, these are fairly large places, right? Big parts of, around HSR layout, etc. With thousands and thousands of homes and offices and establishments, the water is available at a very low, at a very high water table. There's a very high water table there. The other part to your question, to comment, is we are not just looking at wells for extraction for home use, like in my case. We're also looking at 1 million recharge wells where the rainwater can move in to recharge the aquifer. And as a consequence, it becomes like a giant storehouse of water for you to use consequent to the monsoon, right? This also recharges your bore well, by the way. So it not only recharges your shallow aquifer, recharge pits also recharge your deep aquifer.
Okay.
I hope I answered his question.
Yes. So you also talked about biome. So I'm a bit confused that biomes are creating recharge wells. like what are the places they normally work to create recharge wells? Whether
So
it
what
is
Biome has done is they have operated as a catalytic agent. They have brought together, they have created the demand from people like me and you. Okay. And they knew this community. They have created, so they meet people like us and they convince us of the need to have these recharge wells and open wells. They also tell us about what it would cost and how it is done. And then the community comes along and does it. And we pay the community. We don't pay Biome. Right? Biome does this because they see a larger picture in this whole
okay.
story.
So like what is the my question is that like they cannot just go and dig anywhere, right? So like for in order to create a recharge well, you need certain permissions if you are doing it outside, and if you are picking up a place. So how they decide that where to create a recharge well? Am I
Yeah, so people do give them permission to do that. So just to answer an earlier question you had raised, my well was not there when we started constructing my home, and uh, I spoke to Biome, and then I got one of the MANNU VADDARS to come and do it. So they raise the demand, and then people come, they kind of create a demand, and then people like myself
okay?
actually say, yes, we want it done. And then we get it done on a plot of land that belongs to us, or in the case of the wheel and axle plant, is the senior leadership that got it done there. So that's where it is. Any
Okay,
other questions?
so
Yes.
Biome just acts as a intermediate to provide you with those people
Yes.
who did this. Okay, so it's not that
Yes, at no
they
commission,
are doing
right?
it. Okay, no
At
commission.
no
Okay,
commission.
okay, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Sir, I have one question. I
Yes,
just
Sudha.
want to know that somebody who is interested in understanding how the recharge well works would be more who is environmentally more concerned about such things. So, if we see this as a livelihood perspective, will it not hit a plateau after a certain stage in the long term for sustaining that livelihood or scaling up? Or shouldn't it be more of a policy intervention which should happen for such livelihoods?
Oh, you've raised a very important question. And in various cities across the country, and I'm not just talking about Bangalore, the municipal corporations are getting into the act. So we are still talking about urban India, not rural India. And there are now certain legislative sort of measures that have been put into place to ensure people do the right thing, right? Um, so to that extent, the government has done a little bit, right? The issue really is how do you get the community to continue doing this in a way that sort of makes economic sense to them, right? And as somebody has put down as a question, Ankur has put down, is there a certain, can we get some way of reducing the drudgery involved, right? These are questions that are very interesting. The question of whether there is drudgery is something we really should ask the Manu Vadar. In duck rearing as well, I'm sure, hanging out an entire day under a hot sun with 1,000 ducks for company can be can get to you after a little while. um, Actually, I'm speaking on their behalf because I've never tried it, so but it can get to you, and I'm sure drudgery is something that we will only get to know when we ask them. It is not really an answer I have, right? Is there any technical intervention we can bring in, which is the second part of his question? They do use a little bit of, well, let's call it, for lack of a better phrase, let's call it primitive, right? But could you automate it? There is a little bit of automation that is there. So they don't do everything manually. They have a machine that pumps out the water. They do some stuff which is sort of, but very, very primitive in the scope of what can be done, right? So it is possible, right? And bringing that element in won't necessarily reduce their importance. I think their importance will continue. So it could be a win-win. Yes. Sudha, did I answer your question or did I not answer your question?
Yes, I got it.
Okay, thank you. And Ankur, I hope I answered your question as well. Yes.
Yes, sir. We have a question from Shah, sir.
Yes, please,
Yeah,
Dr.
yeah,
Shah.
Gopa. So this is actually to continue with what Jayant raised. I
Yes.
think it's more like, perhaps if I understood him, it is more like a hydrology kind of expertise. Like in the fields, for example, it is often difficult, or the topography does tell you where to build a check dam, for example. Okay, so check dams location is decided by whatever topography you have. Or second question is like, where do you take a bore well, for example, in the, so it's like we had this traditional profession of water finders, and
Yes.
the guys would go and like either they will have some magnetic sticks and sort of,
Yes.
or they would say that, somebody in Marathi, for example, you say Payadu, who was born with his legs out first, would have
Yes.
some sensation to his legs, and he will guide you. I mean, this is what is the tradition in Maharashtra, rural Maharashtra,
Yes.
as to where to dig a bore well so that you will hit an aquifer and your probability of getting water is very high. So perhaps like, in that sense, perhaps Jayant was asking, where do you take this recharge well? Would our hydrologist will tell us, or how do we sort of these MANNU VADDARS would be sort of guided to sort of tell them, look, here is the location that we would like to take a recharge well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Shah. That's a very, because what you're asking actually is, are these people providing physical expertise, or is there more to it than just digging? And the answer is definitely there is much more. That's why I call them the barefoot hydrogeologists, because they have been, as a community, there are some of them who are in their 70s and 80s. They have been doing this for the last 50 years. They have a very good understanding of, first of all, the macro picture. So if they come to an area like Indranagar, they've dug, each family would have dug 50 or 60 of them in Indranagar. So they would tell you, yes, in Indranagar, I have done it here and there and here and there. And therefore, this is the kind of expectation I have about getting water. That's number one. Then when we come to the micro site, the actual plot of land, right? They move around, and they also figure out, then they pinpoint the location where they would like to start digging. And my conversations with them and with Vishy have thrown up the fact that they have an extremely high success rate, right? It's also a fact that in one or two cases, they've actually said, that I know of, right? That I know of, they've actually said, I'm sorry, it's not worthwhile, don't do it. So they do that part as well. So there is a certain amount of, let's say, expertise that they bring in, which is more knowledge-based expertise rather than the physical capability of actually digging it, right? And that makes their overall contribution even more valuable. That's why if a certain amount of automation comes in, this is not something that we can really get rid of them on. They will be there if we continue digging wells, right? But the next generation, of course, has different opinions about this. So I hope I answered your question, Dr. Shah, if that indeed was.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there's a question from Mr. Om Damani as well.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for the interesting interesting discussion. Now, we also see that you have worked with a lot of small and medium enterprises.
Right.
You mentioned. So how do you see, when you talked about scaling it up, it more sounded like a wish list. If government promotes this, if society picks this up, if it becomes 10 times, then it will be this. But based on all your other work, other than these two, what do you, why doesn't it happen naturally? Or what are the challenges if other people on their own, without government intervention, without active promotion, that if they try to pick it up? And I'm saying also, I would like you to relate it to all the other small and medium enterprises, that some of those challenges may be generic, that there is so much potential, but it doesn't happen on its own. It needs external catalyst. Or it may be in reverse, these things were there and they declined for certain historical reason and historical process. So,
fabulous question. If Dr. Damani, would I be right in calling you Dr. Damani? Right?
Yes, it's fine. I mean, the Om is fine, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, fabulous question. Thank you. And I can answer your question in one word, and that word is risk. Probably I can make it a slightly bigger word by calling it de-risk, right? So if you look at, I'll give you an example. I'm going to stray a little bit and I'll come back to this, I promise you, right? So if you are an investor or a shareholder in a company which is listed on the stock exchange or anywhere else, right? Your real risk is to the extent of the money you paid for that share. Nobody, if that company goes bust, nobody can come and attach your home if you're just a shareholder, right? It is a de-risked occupation, technically speaking, in some sense, right? In a formal economy, de-risking is very much a part of the economy, right? It is considered in every possible way. If you look at these two occupations, for instance, and hundreds of other tiny entrepreneurial occupations, de-risking is something that is so crucial, but is completely missing. Let me give you an example now from the duck economy, the transhumance duck economy, to answer Dr. Mani's question. You know, I met a duck farmer called Ponuraj, right? And he was the guy who told me the story about how he lost 5,000 ducks because he stopped the truck and they had a drink of water from a salt bath, right? So in a day, he went from running a profitable, flourishing, reasonably successful business, which had an annual turnover of, let us say, in today's context, it would be probably he would have made a profit of 5.5 lakhs in today's context. This happened some years ago. He went all the way to zero in the span of 24 hours. He was reduced to becoming an agricultural laborer till he got support from a rural cooperative bank to restart. And today he's built up the flock to about, when I met him about 2 years ago, he had built up the flock to about 2,500 ducks. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is, when people see other parts of the economy where you can put in less effort and get reasonable reward without risks, they will move. Because here, they have 2-3 things in favor. One is, many of them, the duck economy particularly, people are very emotionally attached, just like farmers are very emotionally attached to land in many parts of India, right? People are very attached to this occupation. So that is in favor of the occupation. Against it is the fact that they might just get fed up because of the fact that there are big risks, there are ups and downs, when the downs can be very severe downs. I hope I'm answering your question, Dr. Damani. If we can de-risk the occupation, right, by providing government support only for de-risking, we do not need any other support because it's already vibrant, right? We are talking about an economy in the duck economy, which is already, probably, we just don't have a clue, but we know that it is already in tens of crores across this country, right? We know that the total revenue generated from this one community of MANNU VADDARS in Bangalore city alone over the last decade has been about 300 crores, right? It's very hard to believe, actually, but that's not their profit. Their profit is a small fraction of that, very small fraction. So I hope I'm answering your question, saying that if we can de-risk by providing a safety net, and that safety net is very important, and only the government can provide that safety net.
So de-risking will come either from the government or from community itself. So for example, you talked about 100 probably yes. 100 families or size of the extended family who are engaged in duck rearing. Absolutely. So in such context, I would assume that either because of a sense of community, the other people will support, or by a formal arrangement in the community, which does not involve the government. One of the problem it's like essentially a question of insurance, right? That are you willing to pay insurance premium? The biggest problem with insurance is the issue of fraud. Why the insurance company don't insure certain businesses? It's just that, okay, how do I assess it that the accident genuinely happened? What if somebody just claims that, I'm just making this up, ducks fly away, or if people can make any claim. So it is very hard because of the asymmetry of information. It is very hard for external parties to provide insurance. Whereas maybe with a sense of community, where people actually know, are likely to know what happened, community-based insurance scheme can probably work better. So if in any such context, whether these or anything else, in future, I would be very happy to explore that, because that is one of the theme. If it comes back to you for arranging some seed capital, something where essentially providing insurance, if you think that de-risking is really, insurance is the de-risking. Right? Insurance is the viable de-risking model. Either the government is bearing the premium, what you said, or the community is bearing the premium or market, whatever, either by market or by government or by community. So if in your future discussions in this and many other setting, expanding the insurance would be one. My next question is related with a sense of loss. You talk about we don't know whether the next generation will take this up or not. Of course, like all such topic, it's always hard because given that most people on this call are not likely to accept this profession, if maybe as an aggregator, but certainly not as the ground level entrepreneur. So the question comes that next generation doesn't want to do it, but do the practitioners themselves see this as a loss, or they would also rather not have their next generation do this job?
So, Dr. Damani, again, thank you. Two very, very deep questions, actually. And questions that, so, one of the things about entrepreneurship, and I'm speaking now to the students here, because I'm sure the faculty here knows this as much as I do. One of the things about entrepreneurship is, in addition to the capital, you also put in your sweat, we know that, but you also put in a very high level of emotion. There is a high level of ownership. There is passion. That is the joy of entrepreneurship, right? Otherwise, it's just another occupation. And when we see the transhumance duck economy, I'm going to talk about that now. Whenever I chat with them, the one that comes out is the amount of emotion that is attached to this profession. When they talk about, when some of them were saying that they don't expect their children to continue in the occupation, they say so with a sense of sadness, right? Those of you who have done, who have worked in the Himalayas, or you have done treks in the Himalayas, you would have come across the Gaddi shepherds as well, who also are a transhumance, part of the transhumance economy in livestock, right? They also are deeply attached to their profession. And they talk about their children as well with a sense of loss when they feel that their children are not going to enter this profession, right? Now, that makes me wonder whether it is important for us in some way to find a way out where we can get a larger pool to be continuing with the profession as it is now. And I don't have answers. I'm only raising a question because of the passion that is involved in it. The community of well diggers, the MANNU VADDARS, what they have seen is, as a result of what they're doing, Dr. Damani, one of the things they've seen is senior bureaucrats in the city of Bangalore, people in senior leadership positions in organizations like the Wheel and Axle plant are recognizing them, are giving them awards, are giving them certificates, are saying that thanks to you, this is happening. And I think that's a great thing that's happening, because if I say something positive to them, that has one level of impact. But if there's an IAS officer who's saying something positive and recognizing the commitment of these people, that can have a scalable multiplier impact. And we have seen that happen. So if, in addition to the de-risking part that you and I discussed a few minutes ago, we can have dignity and passion coming in, imagine what we could do to continuing these occupations, right? I hope I've answered or addressed your question. Actually, it's more a dialogue with you and me. It's not really a Q&A. So just a thought.
Sure. No, that's very nice. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Right.
Thank you. So like I said, do keep the insurance part in mind. Anytime in future, you will have my contact to Professor Shah and others here. So.
Fantastic. That's a great idea, and I'll definitely think that through. Right. By the way, I'm making this presentation particularly on the so-called duck economy, primarily as a hobbyist, as somebody who's seen it by the roadside when I was driving and stopped by and asked some questions and learned about it subsequently. But it's a great point that you've made, and I promise you it's something that I would be keen to follow up on. Right. Yes.
Yeah, Sudha, if there are no more questions, maybe we can request if Professor Anand Rao, who is the head of the center, to propose.
Yes, sir. There was a question, sir, on YouTube that is answered, and I think Anand Rao, sir, has been busy with another meeting. Okay. So I would say thank you so much, sir, for a very interesting session. And I would like to ask Shah, sir, and Pankaj, sir, to say a few words before closing the session.
Sorry, I just joined a few minutes ago when this question and answer was happening, but I missed the talk, and I'll watch it on YouTube later. I feel there was a very interesting discussion that was happening. I just joined a few minutes ago. Yeah, but please carry on. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks, Mr. Gopa. Of course, Pankaj, who knows you better, will also perhaps propose a vote of thanks. But, although we don't teach any informal economy kind of a formal course, let me put it that way, that there is no, but I think the students, it was good that you brought out these unconventional kind of ways that our informal economy very, very lucidly you presented the case of both these informal economies of these duck and as well as these Manu Vadar community, as to what kind of, like the proportion was also the kinds of figures that you gave was also faculty members who are present here. For them also, I mean, for me personally, it was like, 300 crores or 3,000 crores that is sort of the money involvement or economy. So it was a very good eye-opening thing, and we really wish to thank you on behalf of the student community for sort of making this nice presentation, Gopa. Thank you. Pankaj, you want to say something?
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Thank you very much.
I'm in the dark, so that's nice. In the dark sometimes. So thanks a lot, Gopa, and I think Professor Shah has said it very nicely. And I think there's the categories of what is conventional, what is mainstream. Maybe this kind of activity generically is more conventional at what we consider unconventional. Because if India's economy is almost 90% in the informal sector, like everybody agrees, then we are obviously missing out a lot. And these might be representatives of that informal economy. And, what I think you brought out, the issue of tradition, of skill, of ecology, of economy. So it's a very complex matrix out there. And maybe it's also, I think the point that Om was also making, maybe it's okay if it's below the radar actually. Maybe if it comes above the radar is when it might get messed up with the market. And so I'm just putting that out, but I think like Professor Shah said, very interesting and very provocative, very, very insightful. So thank you so much on behalf of the entire Sitara community. And maybe next time around or in a different conversation, what could a group of faculty and students in a place like Sitara do about this? Understanding it, documenting it, intervening in some ways. If you have some thoughts on this at some point, maybe please do share with us, and we can have another conversation with you as well. But I just wrap up by a big thank you, and really grateful for you coming on board and sharing this really, really insightful set of stories with us. Thank you, Gopa.
Thank you so much, Pankaj, and delighted to have done this. Thank you to everyone for this opportunity. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sudha,